This is a message of thanks and gratitude to all you amazing Reluctant Preppers who are making Reluctant Preppers possible by supporting our mission on Patreon. With your help, we're overcoming a 75% drop in YouTube earnings because you're not standing still, but are doing something about it and taking action by going to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledging to keep us on the air. Now our team is 42 patrons strong and growing, and when we reach 100 patrons, we'll start sending out tokens of gratitude as a handwritten note from your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, and an autograph signed on a U.S. Silver Eagle to one of our patrons selected at random each and every month. If you haven't yet taken the step of joining in to support Reluctant Preppers, it's so easy. Just go to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledge any amount you can. You guys are awesome, and we can do this together with your help at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Did you know you can buy silver at spot price? Get your 10-ounce bar of silver at spot price today. Go to sdbullion.com/RP. Not only will you be buying silver without any premium, you'll also be supporting the independent media. Reluctant Preppers gets a small commission when you take advantage of this special offer, going to sdbullion.com/RP. That's sdbullion.com/RP.
One of the things that we often tell people who live near major cities like, say, Atlanta or Houston, we always say, if you're looking at a property, you want to be at least one tank of gas away from a town like that, because that's how far those guys are going to get. You know, when they leave Houston, when they leave Atlanta, when they leave L.A., they got one tank of gas. And that's however far they get, that's where they're going. And I tell you, my grandfather, who lived through World War II, told me that the scariest thing that he had ever seen in his entire life, I want to tell you, my grandpa was a tough guy. The scariest thing that he had ever seen in his entire life was a hungry human being. And when a hungry human being comes, onto your property or comes near you, you've got a major problem.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. Today our guest is Jerry Robinson, author of Bankruptcy of Our Nation and founder of Follow the Money Daily, where he offers daily commentary on the state of finances of our country and of the world. Jerry, welcome to Reluctant Preppers.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you.
Today we'd like to talk with you about where in the world is the right place for people to settle down, to move, if they are interested in reducing risk of social unrest or turmoil that might come, and have a safe location for their family where they can have the basic needs met and are less dependent on perhaps unreliable infrastructure or systems, and also perhaps further out of harm's way than they might be in case of social unrest, and what principles would guide people in helping to make a decision of where's the right place for them to live?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something that my wife and I have talked about extensively. In fact, we had moved down to Houston, Texas. I mean, you're talking 4 or 5 million people, I guess, all depending on how you count the metro area. But, overall, we were living in a massive city, and, of course, hurricanes would come in occasionally, and you would always see the breakdown of the society. I mean, even though people living in Houston know hurricanes come, on a fairly or a semi-regular basis, they would still freak out. Stores would be empty, and people would be going up the only highway that goes north, I-45, and that highway would be completely congested. And it just took a few of those. Of course, fortunately, I never experienced that when I was living there, but I have family there. And I've heard all of the stories, and I saw it with my own eyes when I was there. Just too many people. And the major threat, I think, for going forward is population density. That's one of the things you really want to look at. It's okay if there's 5 million people, but if it's in a 50-mile square radius, that's a problem. So you want to make sure that your population density is low. And that's something that Jennifer and I, my wife and I, decided. We just up and left Houston, Texas, and came to a nice pocket of area in northwest Arkansas. Population density here where I'm at is very, very thin. Of course, I'm kind of out in sticks now, but we've got our mini ranch. We have, we're growing a garden. We have all kinds of fruits and vegetables. We have fruit trees, nut trees, and chickens. I mean, the whole 9 yards. And the reason is because I believe, unfortunately, over the course of the next several years, maybe even up to 10 years from now, we're going to see a societal collapse in the major metropolitan areas. And many people are worried about terrorism. Others are worried about natural disasters that could strike cities. Some others are concerned about even war here in the country. But again, those types of threats are minuscule compared to a population that is very high, population density that's very high. So I'd say the very first thing to do is if somebody's wanting to get into a place where they feel safer, their family's safer, look for that low population density. Not everybody can just up and leave like we did whenever they're, have a mortgage or they have, kids going to school or whatever the case might be. So what about people who are living in major metropolitan areas or even smaller cities and they really feel that deep down vibe just to get out of the town? Well, one suggestion would be to drive out, maybe a few hours from where you live and just purchase a piece of land somewhere out. You can usually buy an acre or two out in the middle of nowhere for, usually just $1,000 or $2,000. And, several people I know have done this and they have a pop-up or they have a tent or something. And they basically, if something happens in their town, they can get out and take their stuff with them, their preparations with them, and go out there, pop up their pop-up or a tent, have a makeshift living arrangement on their own property, on their own land. I think that's the one thing that's so important. You don't want to be dependent upon other people unless you have already made preparations for that ahead of time. That's a very bad time to be making plans and living arrangements whenever when there's an emergency.
And speaking of that land, not just any land is equivalent to any others. What characteristics would you specifically put as the highest priority when selecting the amenities or the natural resources that are present on that land?
Whenever we purchased our land, and I can really only speak to what I was looking for, and I did a lot of research. I read a lot of good books. Joel Skousen has put out a good book on this called Strategic Relocation. Fantastic book. There are some other books as well and resources for people who are looking for this kind of thing. You can even go into old bookstores and read about, having your own country home or something like that. You'll find a lot of great resources out there for free on the web as well. But the thing that was important to me, and I can really tell you this, was water, having access to water. I have a creek, that runs through the property. It's a live creek. Have a pond on the property. You want to have good soil. A lot of the soil that I have is pretty rocky, but we were able to salvage quite a bit of land here and, till it down and create a really nice garden. That's really important. I think also so many people who have land don't take full advantage of it by placing trees and nut-bearing trees and fruit-bearing trees. And so I would say, having a little bit of extra room and then taking that commitment. I mean, you can purchase these trees for not very expensive, and they'll provide you almost a lifetime of wonderful food, and you'll save a lot of money. So I would say water is way up there, as well as good land. And, the property that we bought was not all fixed up. It wasn't all pretty. There was thorns. There were things that needed to be fixed. And I would say that for most people, unless they're just walking around with a massive amount of money, that's a really good way to do it. And it becomes a project. And that way you get to really learn the lay of your land. And so that's what I would recommend to people. I think, again, water, the ability to cultivate your own food. Certainly if you want to have animals, make sure there's no restrictions in your area. I know some states are getting real bizarre about it. And don't be afraid to buy something that needs a little bit of TLC. As long as you have some strength left in your bones and in your body, that's something you can certainly do.
Now, back to the question of general location. One of the slides I saw you display at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium in Las Vegas, Nevada recently showed a map that indicated where all the major population centers were, a lot of them clustered along the borders of the country, along the coastline or other border areas. And one of the speakers there talked about staying away from the borders. Are there considerations in addition to simply population density that would make being very close to a border less advantageous for security?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's probably not something I would do. I probably wouldn't want to live right there on the border. Of course, it doesn't matter where it is, whether it's on the border of an ocean or whether it's the border of another country. I would rather be inland for at least the next decade or so as we kind of see how things sort out. So I think that's important. Another thing we probably didn't mention that's important is how are you going to make money? Many people think it's great to move out in the middle of nowhere. But, then all of a sudden, how are you going to make money? You got to drive somewhere. And then, in fact, I just talked with somebody recently who had done this. He had left the city, had moved out, had a great piece of property, well over 10 acres, had just built his dream prepper home. And now, with gas prices the way that they are, he's driving into town. And, of course, his wife's staying home to homeschool. And so it's just a wonderful setup. But he can't afford the gas anymore because he's driving back and forth so much. And so they're having to sell the house. And see, that's just a terrible story. I think that one of the most important concepts that we teach is the power of creating multiple streams of income. So many people are dependent upon a job exclusively for all of their income. And of course, that's very scary because then you're at the mercy of your employer. So there are so many ways to make multiple streams of income. And that's something that we focus on at our organization. I think that's one of the ways we empower individuals to prep and to actually take action is that they do have those multiple streams of income coming in so they're not beholden to one single job, so they can live out wherever they choose. And as long as they have internet, they can operate. The internet's an absolutely wonderful thing, and it certainly has leveled the playing field for so many entrepreneurs.
Right. It opens up a lot of opportunities that are portable and not location dependent for many folks, as well as things that can fit into their timetable. It's not locked down. Often the things that you're able to do to create income streams there can work around your schedule to a great extent, and that can be fit a more flexible lifestyle where if you need to try to be doing some of these agricultural things or homeschooling, as you mentioned, other things that are more family-centered can afford you some of that flexibility. Now, in the case of a societal collapse that we're describing the possibility of, it wouldn't be right to put all your eggs in that basket and assume that the internet and the ecosystem of the economy surrounding the internet is going to be there and present and ready to continue to provide you with income. So that's where we fall back on some of those more fundamental things I think you were talking about, such as large garden and trees that can create produce and so on for your family, water, chickens, all that sort of thing. Any further thoughts along those lines? You mentioned multiple streams of income, some of those that might not be entirely dependent on a well-functioning societal infrastructure, including the internet.
Well, that's a really good question. We can dive there. Before I do, I was just thinking of one other thing that I completely thought about, and that was the concept of transportation thoroughfares whenever you're selecting a property. That was something else that I forgot until just now that was very important on our list. We didn't want to be right smack dab in the middle of a major highway or next to a major thoroughfare. And I think that's very, very vital. One of the things that we often tell people who live near major cities, like say Atlanta or Houston, we always say, if you're looking at a property, you want to be at least one tank of gas away from a town like that, because that's how far those guys are going to get. When they leave Houston, when they leave Atlanta, when they leave LA, they got one tank of gas. And that's however far they get, that's where they're going. And I tell you, my grandfather who lived through World War II told me that the scariest thing that he had ever seen in his entire life, and I want to tell you, my grandpa was a tough guy. The scariest thing that he had ever seen in his entire life was a hungry human being. And when a hungry human being comes, onto your property or comes near you, you've got a major problem. I mean, a major problem. And so this is what we're faced with. And I think the transportation thoroughfares are something to certainly pay close attention to as well when you're selecting a property, as well as demographics and all of that. Now, as far as income streams, obviously the internet, as we mentioned, is a wonderful way to create multiple streams of income. But what happens if the power goes out? What happens if they knock the internet out? I mean, all these scenarios. What if we have a big solar flare and it knocks out the power grid for even a month or two? I mean, I've even heard even longer stretches. So how do you make money during that time? Well, I think you're absolutely right. We're growing enough food to feed ourselves, to store some, and to sell the excess. We have a real nice farmer's market, probably about 15 minutes, probably about 30 minutes away from where we live. And so we plan on taking a lot of our excess fruit and vegetables and nuts and all of those things down to the farmers market to make extra money. We also talk about the ability to create a referral business. That's something that we're actually talking about right now on our website at followthemoneydaily.com. And that is a referral business where you lock up with other businesses who are providing a product or a service, usually a service, and you help them advertise, and then you share in the revenue. And we go into great detail about how to do that. All you need is a phone for that to work. So you don't really need the internet for that. And there's probably, we have about 22 different income streams on our website that people can check out. It's also in our book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation. It's just something that we really feel people need to be ready for. It's unfortunately, I think it was on the Drudge Report I was reading the other day, or maybe it was USA Today. I can't remember what I was reading, but 48% of Americans, the latest poll, have less than 1 month of savings. I mean, this is just ridiculous. We have so much money. People say, well, I'm not making very much money. Well, you're giving money away to the corporations. I mean, if you really take a look at the amount of money that's coming into most people's lives, if they would stop spending it upon cheap Chinese imports, they would actually have a decent amount of money that they could try to store away a little bit. So we're living on the edge, and half of the people don't have enough to make it through 1 month without bankruptcy or foreclosure. This is not good. This does not end well. Think about how many people are on prescription drugs, walking through the streets. There's 300 million guns flowing through the United States of America and homes. And, so this whole thing is just like a big fireworks display, and there's a match that just needs to be lit, and we're going to see it blow sky high. It's so unfortunate. That such a wealthy nation has ended up here.
And some of those urban areas we were talking about earlier are known to be notoriously more violence-prone than others. We have two close family members who live in the Los Angeles area, one of whom referred to it as a kill zone in case of social breakdown. And there are some of those metropolitan areas that are notoriously more dangerous than others. I was listening to the radio yesterday, and they said that on an average weekend in Chicago, there can be anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 street shootings. So it's become so routine that it doesn't even necessarily make major news stories anymore. The whole country is riveted by some of these more glamorous examples of racially opposed, violent crimes recently or something where there may be some spectacular shootings, but the fact that this happens on a routine basis in a lot of larger metropolitan areas, it might be especially important for people who live in or near those areas to have, as you mentioned, a safer location to get to in case of societal collapse.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just this last weekend I had to go out and speak at a conference, just like that Liberty Mastermind Symposium that we did in Las Vegas. I was at another conference in Florida, and even when I was in Las Vegas, when I was there with you, when I'm in these big towns, I get that same vibe no matter what, especially in Las Vegas. I felt Las Vegas was just a powder keg. I could not get out of that place quick enough. When I was in Florida, I felt very similar. These towns are too big. There's just too many people all moving to them. And in fact, we're seeing that currently, and this was a staggering statistic. I couldn't believe it when I read it, but 81% of Americans live in high population density metropolitan areas. Only 19% of Americans live in rural areas. That's almost astonishing. It's almost hard to believe because America was really bred in these rural communities, and of course many of them are drying up. But that's okay. That actually just means that the population density where I'm at is just lower, and that's good for my family, and that's really what I want.
And it really does demonstrate, as you said, a historical shift from the way that our country was constituted for the first 200 years of its history. And it significantly increases the risk and the dependency on the fragile stability of that system, which really becomes like a house of cards. So a lot of people who are making preparations are instinctively have a gut sense that there is this vulnerability that's increasing on a daily and yearly basis. You mentioned it might be up till who knows, years before a major collapse event would happen. But the saying that we've heard a number of people share is that I'd rather be 7 years early than 1 day late. So the time to make preparations is not after you start to see convulsive changes and after it becomes obvious and it's on the evening news and that sort of thing, because by then there's rushes on the stores for supplies and you're not going to find that location and make those relationships. So you've got to do it during the calm times. And I remember my dad taught me a song called The Arkansas Traveler about a man who fiddles on his front doorstep, and a traveler came along and asked why he wasn't fixing the leak in his roof. And he said, well, I can't fix it when it's raining, and then when it stops raining, it's not leaking. So the idea is if you don't deal with the problem when it's the dry time, when the flood comes, you won't be able to do it. And people will scoff, and they make fun of you, make light of you, because they're living the high life, the good life, while you're making some sacrifices, as you mentioned, some belt tightening to live within your means and be able to save and be able to make some of those preparations that don't necessarily increase your day-to-day feeling of standard of living, of luxurious living, but you're taking those prudent steps for your family because you're preparing for that time that you see coming, because you want to keep your family aware and prepared, is what we say here at ReluctantPreppers.com.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, that's what President JFK said. He said the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. And back to your point about the concept of waiting too long, with the internet and the ability for information to spread like wildfire, if it wants to, you will not have time to go out and prepare once something major happens, especially if the internet is still up and communication systems are still available. There is just simply not enough time to take the preparation. So, we actually on our website at ftmdaily.com, followthemoneydaily.com, we talk about very specific things that people can do in our 5 levels of financial freedom. And we talk about how to create that food and water supply. And it's not difficult. I mean, many people try to make it too difficult, and they try to buy all these things they're never going to eat, these MREs. And, and if you like those, that's fine. But my wife and I just don't care for that. We like to eat, normal foods, and that's what we would want to eat in a time of crisis. So we simply buy more, and then we just use a rotation system. So we always have 6 months of food that we're going to eat, so we're going to eat no matter what. And so we just keep it on hand, and we just go through it, and we always keep it stocked. And as far as water goes, we have a couple of unique systems. One, we have a rainwater collection system, which we mainly use for watering our garden, but we can always use it for potable drinking water if we needed to. The second thing is we have these large 55-gallon drums or barrels that you can buy. We actually found some at a very cheap garage sale, and somebody had a bunch of them. We just bought as many as we could. And we, of course, filled them with water and then treated it, and those will stay good for a very long time. And then finally, probably one of the most powerful things that you can do, especially if you live in an urban area and you want clean drinking water no matter what, is to pick up a Catadyne micro water filter. And these are very, very cool. They're what the Swiss Army has used for a long time. The U.S. Army has used them as well. I think they'll purify up to 13,000 gallons of water on one single filter. And you can if you've got a body of water anywhere around you, assuming that it's not salt water, you can take that and you can pump it and you can drink it. So, you instantly have in your pocket a water filter that can always create water for you that you can drink. It's not the most convenient thing if you need to take a bath or something, but if you want drinking water, that's a powerful thing. And it's usually $200 or $300. So it's an investment. But something like that could really save your hide if you needed it.
Another topic you brought up a minute ago I want to circle back to. You mentioned taking produce that you were able to create to the farmer's market. That kind of sharing, trading, buying and selling, or in the case of a societal collapse, perhaps bartering, with a network of people nearby local producers of foodstuffs and other necessities of life, is a key survival and preparation planning element that a lot of our guests have talked about. And we've had people who've made comments on some of our videos that have said, for example, why save up silver, junk silver coins or anything like that, because you can't take those into the grocery store and trade silver for food. And I think that's maybe looking at it from a modernistic perspective that isn't really reflective, again, of the history of our country or of mankind, is grocery stores aren't where food comes from. And we too easily forget that when we become accustomed to these modern supply chains. And in the case of a collapse, you'll be back to dealing with the people who are the producers locally of food, and they may well be willing to do bartering for things of value, including silver.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. That's exactly right. Having a community of some kind. I mean, many people try to approach prepping as a kind of a lone ranger type of situation. And, if you're in a city, if you're in an urban area, that might be best. I mean, maybe you need to keep your mouth shut. In fact, you should keep your mouth shut about, what you have. There's a really great book called Urban Survival Guide, and it was written by a good friend of mine named David Morris. And he made a really great point to me one day. He said, if I want to share my food and water or supplies with my neighbor, that's my prerogative. And I can if I want to. But I want to be able to do it on my own terms. I don't want my neighbor to know that my house is full of food. However, I can always, if I see that his son or daughter is going hungry, I can always sneak out in the middle of the night, put some food and water on their doorstep, and give anonymously, because obviously I wouldn't be able to stomach that if I saw that going on, but they don't have to know where it's coming from. And I think that's very important. A lot of people brag about what they have, I'm prepping. Well, that's going to come back and bite you eventually. So it's important to keep those things down low. Now, if you live in a rural community, a lot of people around you are kind of living the same way. I mean, they're preppers. They just don't really know it. They have, plenty of livestock. They got plenty of food. They got plenty of water. So, you don't have to worry as much about some of those folks. And you'll find, as you begin to build community with them, that many of them, you can glean so much information. We have lost so much great information from previous generations. This generation that we're living in now, I mean, we can't live without AC. We can't live without heat. We can't live without electricity. And, I'm glad we don't. I'm glad we don't have to live without it. But we are not a very tough generation. We look back at that greatest generation, World War II, World War I. We go back and we see the kind of people that we used to be. We've gotten so sensitive now, so soft. It's just not a good thing. I mean, we have a really bad set of criteria, things that are kind of this bad combination of all these things that are kind of lining up like a perfect storm. And like we said, it's just not going to end well.
One more point related to that idea of bartering or trading. In terms of what you might be able to use as currency going forward, a lot of people who may be pulling their money out of stocks or other what they perceive as more risky investments and want to have a safe place to put their funds might be tempted to go into cash in their savings account, bank account, checking account, or even paper dollar bills. What is the future? You happen to be, and our visitors might not know this, but an expert on money trends and the U.S. dollar. So what is your outlook of the current state of health of the U.S. dollar and your prognosis for its health in the next decade to come?
Well, my background, as you mentioned, I'm an Austrian economist. Whether that makes me an expert or not, I mean, I guess I've written books on it and whatnot. But as far as the dollar goes, yes. I mean, I think most people by now, especially people in your audience, have got it through their skulls. I mean, this is a problem. The dollar is a problem. And the reason that the dollar is a problem is because it's too available. It's too much supply. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if that can be sustained, but it can't. That's what's so unfortunate. When people look at their 401k statements, or they look at the stock market, or they look at their IRA statement, or they look at their housing value, or they look at their income, this is the very first generation. And if any of your listeners can think of another generation, please, tell them to send it to me, because I have looked high and long to find this. We are the very first generation that demands that the present must be the minimum. In essence, my income must go up. My IRA, my retirement account must go up. The stock market must go up. My house value must go up. My everything must go up. Now, think about it. How is that possible? How is that even possible? Well, it's not possible unless you have an expanding currency base. Well, how do you allow your currency to perpetually expand? Well, you have to have expanding demand. Well, how do you create expanding demand? Well, you have to get other countries to want to take that currency and use it or hold it or whatever. And we did that with oil. That's how we did it. But now, as we all know, Russia, China, these other countries, they want a seat at the table. They're tired of using the dollar because we get all the benefits. It's been called the exorbitant privilege that we have. We get to print as much money as we want to, and other countries hold it, and therefore we don't really deal with the inflation. But we can't keep doing this. I mean, it's just not sustainable. Never has been throughout history. Every single situation like this has ended in disaster. But the problem with America, is that our situation is the largest in history. There has never been anything like this before. So this one is going to go south. The currency is going to collapse. Now, I started saying this back in 2004. People were crossing their eyes, looking at me weird, and I was too early. But of course, I wasn't saying it was going to collapse next year. That's one thing that I've never said. I've always told people that we don't know when it's going to collapse. It's just going to. And that's all that matters. I mean, knowing when would be great, but we can't possibly know that. But if you don't know when, the next best thing you can know is, what are you going to do when it does? And when you ask people that, many people say, well, I don't know.
And what are you going to do now before it does?
Well, exactly. What's your exit strategy, in other words? If the dollar does collapse, do you have an exit strategy? And of course, you mentioned silver, gold, or certainly things, even other foreign currencies. And some people don't like that idea because they say, well, it's just paper. But remember, currencies are like seesaws in the fact that when one falls, another one has to go up by default. And so you can identify which currencies really kind of seesaw back and forth on each other. So if the dollar goes down dramatically, it has to go down dramatically in relation to another currency. So which currency is going to go up if the dollar goes down? Well, if you do your homework, you begin to kind of study that and you realize, and we actually have a currency monitor that we provide all of our subscribers where we list our favorite currencies, and those change. I mean, we update that once a month. It's this is definitely a fluid type of economy that we're in. It's not static. So we do put out a lot of great information for people who are wanting to know how to diversify their investments, how to prepare for inevitable inflation, which will, by the way, unfortunately, we believe will be followed by a sustained period of deflation. And the reason for that is that the amount of currency that's in the system is unsustainable. They're going to have to bleed it dry. They're going to have to take some of the money out. And when you take the money out of the system, you do that, A, by raising interest rates, because interest rates are like levers. If you raise an interest rate, let's say you and I are driving down the road and we see a bank that has a CD rate of 9%. Well, I mean, I'm slamming on the brakes. I'm going in, I'm taking a bunch of money in up to the FDIC limit and saying, give me 9% a year. I mean, that's risk-free. Well, that's how the monetary system or the banking system is able to suck all that money in. But if they want the money to go out into the general economy and the general circulation, they lower rates. That way you say, well, I need to take my money out of the bank. It's just useless there. And you take it out and you begin doing things with it. Well, in order for this inflation to be dealt with, which we're eventually going to be faced with, and I'm talking major inflation, they're going to have to raise interest rates. And of course, that's going to be the end of the house of cards. Because if you raise interest rates on the $1 trillion plus student loan debt, if you raise interest rates on the credit card debt and on adjustable rate mortgages and upon all this business debt, you raise rates on the national debt, I mean, you're talking massive pain. And they won't be able to raise it just one time. They're going to have to raise it again, and they're going to have to raise it again, just like they cut rates, and then they cut them some more, and then they cut them because it ain't working. They got to keep cutting. Now they're down to zero, practically zero, and they still can't get what they want. So what makes us think that when they raise it, it's going to be enough? They're going to have to keep raising it and raising it and raising it, and this is going to cause massive amounts of deflation. And all of this stuff sounds spooky, scary. The truth of the matter is that this is all historically identifiable. And people have made lots of money during times like this, so we're not worried about it. We don't know the timing of it, but we are committed to being prepared for it. And I think that's what your show is all about. So, I think that's why your folks listen to you, because they want to be prepared for these kinds of things.
So for people who'd like to find out more about the information that you offer, where can they go for more?
Well, we have a website, and it's FTM, like follow the money, ftmdaily.com. And right there we have tons of free information. We have a free daily briefing that goes out every day. They can sign up for that on email. And then we also have a subscriber area where we provide income ideas, and we provide currency ideas, and we provide investing ideas, and even ideas for people who want to trade stocks or trade currencies. I mean, all of this information is part of our subscriber program that we offer, but we have a lot of free materials there that people can check out, ftmdaily.com on the web.
Well, Jerry Robinson, thank you so much for being here and with our Reluctant Prepper audience, and we'll hope to have you back again sometime to talk about more of these topics. Thank you for joining us.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.